Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If? This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku's helped a female hero. Now before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. So All Might, what do you think about the supposed next All Might that's going to be graduating this year? He has a name, you know? All Might's voice boomed even on the small TV that barely fit in their room. And I suggest you get used to saying it loud and proud. Right? Sorry, the future pro-hero Perseverance. Thank you. As for what I think of that young man. All Might gave a great big smile and slapped his knee. The large yellow suit he wore would have been a fashion mistake on nearly anyone else, but All Might made it work by virtue of him being All Might. Well, let's just put it this way. With pros like him on the way, I feel like I can safely think about retiring in a couple of decades. Oh my, do you really think he'll be as good as you? As good? All Might asked for clarification, his smile fading into a tight-lipped frown. Yes. No, I don't think he'll be as good. The serious look lasted for only a couple of seconds before a mighty grin took over All Might's face. I think he'll be better. Having been working with the young man for a while now, I have a great respect for him. Any insight into how his quirk works? Much like yours, his is shrouded in mystery and, yes, our quirks. While young Perseverance's quirk is similar to mine in that we both pack quite a punch, our quirks are both unique. While I've grown accustomed to my quirk and know its ins and outs, I don't believe that Perseverance can say the same. He's still discovering the nuances of his quirk. All Might snapped his finger and slapped his knee again. Just last week All Might stopped. Actually, I'll let him reveal that little surprise. Let's move on to the next question. Right? Well, since you and Perseverance have similar quirks, rumors have started to form around your relationship with him. Many believe that he may even be your son. Nonsense, All Might bellowed. To even think of such would be an insult to the boy's parents, who are every bit as kind-hearted as he is. Hey sis. Junko tore her eyes from the TV and glanced down at her little sister Mei, who was all but bouncing on the small kotatsu they all shared in the winter. When they had electricity at any rate. She looked at her sister's toothy grin for a moment and then remembered that she was currently studying. What is it, Mei? I'm studying for the hero exam. You're going to be a better hero than that, Percy guy, right? Mei asked, her brow furrowing as her eyes zoomed in and out at random. You're talking about Perseverance, right? Junko placed a hand on her sister's thick pink hair that was similar in texture to her own blue and pink hair. Yeah, him. Mei jumped up while keeping her hand planted on the kotatsu, her legs going up high enough that Junko was almost worried her little sister was going to go full scorpion and end up with a bloodied lip. Fin. Mei had no such concerns. People keep talking about how great he is, but that's just because they don't know how awesome you are. If I don't, I bet you will. Junko placed a hand on her sister's head to stop her from jumping. Their family had been a family of pros who were effectively living weapons. Mei was no exception. With her eyes, she could even see further than Junko could. No. Mei shook her head and wiggled free from Junko's grasp. I'm not going to be a hero. I'm going to make lots of cool babies for you to use. I really don't know where you got that from. Junko sighed and shoved her little sister back a bit. One day, Mei had just randomly started to call the little gizmos she made babies. It confused both her and Otto. Now start studying your English, USCK at it? No. Yeah. Junko stuck her tongue out and looked at her own open textbook. When it came to school, she was pretty good at all the subjects, but math was by far her best subject. Her brother joked that it was because of her quirk. Now let me study. Are you sure you aren't going to watch the TV? You shush. Go see what Otto is doing. Junko placed her pen to the paper again and resumed the mind-numbing task of studying English. She knew why it was required, but that didn't mean she wanted to actually study it. It could be useful if she ever took up the American Hero program that seemed popular with pros. Hell, even All Might used the program. She glanced back up towards the TV and saw that it was showing an image of Perseverance fighting against some villain with a gigantification quirk. With his messy green hair, light speckling of freckles, and a charming smile, it was easy to see why so many of the girls in her school were completely charmed by him. Apparently, The UA entrance exam was going to be extra-packed this year because of him. Not that it mattered. Junko smiled and closed her eyes for just a moment. She was going to get in. She had the skills. She had the power. She had the quirk. All she needed to do was pass the written portion, and she was as good as in. Though she had always wanted to go to UA, she had to admit she wanted to meet Perseverance there one day. All right. Otto's boisterous voice came in from the small hallway-like kitchen that was only separated by a thin and increasingly damaged door. Juju Mimi. Are you two ready for some grub? Junko rolled her eyes. She had no idea where that came from either. Her brother had picked up a weird habit of coming up with terrible nicknames that were just the first syllable of someone's name repeated. I'm not sure if I've recovered from the last time you cooked. Hey. Her brother entered their small room and placed a small pot of soup down in the center of the table, its heated contents putting a smile on her face. It's better than the bargain bin at the convenience store. Nope. May joined in, a pair of chopsticks already in her hands. So mean. Otto pouted with a huff. Her little brother was anything but little. Barely a year younger than her, he was already taller than most fully grown men. And twice as dirty. His hands were clean up to his elbows and were covered in small band-aids that he got from his job. Even his bright pink hair looked to be part grease at this point. Anyways, now that I'm roasted, let's get eating. Junko nodded and grabbed her own pair of mismatched chopsticks, one a recycled disposable from the convenience store and the other a pen that had been completely used up. She always felt so guilty relying on Otto, but any time she brought it up, he'd just blow her off and say things like he'd be fixing cars and appliances anyways, and how school was never really his thing, and that she'd pay him back once she became a big-name hero. Hey, Junko paused as she blew on a clump of mismatched noodles and looked at her little brother and sister. I love you guys. She could not say the same about her father. He was the reason why they were in this mess. He had gambled away all their mother's money, got both of them involved with the Yakuza, and forced Mom to start working with some local villains. To this day, Junko could still hear the late-night arguments that their parents had when they thought her and Otto were asleep. They grew to hate each other. May had been their attempt to fix their marriage. It worked. Until they both died. She missed her old life. The friends she used to have. Her room. Her own personal room that was larger than this room she shared with her siblings. She missed everything but her parents. Junko shook her head and smiled at her siblings again. She'd give them a good life again. To do that, she was going to become a hero. The best she could. She had gotten in. Not officially, as she was pretty sure that the acceptance letters hadn't even been sent out yet, but she had to have gotten in. She had cleared out so many robots. All those times with trick shots and a lucky encounter where she saw someone hit a kill SW on one of the robots had led her to scoring a massive kill count against the robots. Enough that she didn't quite regret all those times she had chosen to help other students instead. And she had crushed the written exam easily. Even if only one person from each arena got in, Junko was beyond confident that come spring, she would be going to UA. It took all she had to not start skipping her way back home after school. She might even be able to get some practice in after she picked May up. Junko Hatsume. Junko stopped in her tracks and looked up at the tall bald man wearing a formal suit. The bottom portion of his face was covered by a bright red beard that was kept neatly trimmed. His eyes were hidden behind a pair of sunglasses that were so dark she wondered how he could even see. He stood next to a sleek black car. All of it felt official in the worst possible way. Her gut was telling her to run away and cry for stranger danger. Yes? She asked, hoping that this wasn't involving Otto dropping out of school, or why they weren't in the orphanage. Jinpei Anoka? The man pulled out a badge that she instantly recognized. Hero Public Safety Commission. He stepped to the side and opened the car door, revealing another man sitting in there. We'd like to talk if you don't mind. But I have to pick up my little sister. May Hatsume, Jinpei said and nodded. If you agree, I'll guide her to your home in your place. That's not a good idea. Junko held up her hands. She tends to bite strangers if they touch her. Jinpei pulled out a pair of black gloves. I'm prepared. Wait, what's this all about? What does the Hero Public Safety Commission want with me? I'm not a hero. Not yet. The man from inside the car leaned down and smiled at her. He was thin and old, but had a kind smile on his face. But that's what we want to talk to you about. We have an offer for you. What? She gripped her bag tight in her hands, panic flooding over her for a few moments. Did I not get into UA? That's yet to be seen now, please. The man sat back in the car and patted the seat next to him. Have a seat and we can discuss your future. Junko bit her lip and looked at Jinpei, then at the car. They already knew where to find her and May. If they were bad guys, they wouldn't do the get in the car trick. Plus they had a badge. And a nice car. And no candy. She nodded and sat down in the back. The inside of the car was spacious, and the Altucher seat was comfortable enough to make it feel like it was swallowing her whole. She jumped when the door slammed shut, and again when the engine began to purr. The driver was a woman with blonde hair and a stern face. So, what is all this? She asked, barely able to glance at the elderly man. And who are you? I'm Uso Suki, the president of the Hero Public Safety Commission. Uso pulled out a card from his wallet and handed it to her. It had all the official-looking information: address of the commission headquarters, a phone number, and an extension. We saw the footage of your during the UA entrance exam and were impressed. Well, that's good. If the HPSC was impressed with her skills, then she was pretty much a shoo-in for UA. Indeed, Uso nodded and gave her a kind smile. You see, the commission is starting up a new program, one where we give a young hopeful hero special training. We've selected you to be the first we're offering this to. But, she paused. UA. The training you'll receive will be on par, if not better than the training you'd receive at UA. Uso handed her a slender file with a few pages in it, each marked with a tab on where she was expected to sign her name. We've hired the best tutors and trainers in Japan for this. You may well find yourself pulling ahead of your UA peers, and you also won't have to take the hero license exam. Food and shelter will be provided for you at the training facility. And my family, you won't be allowed to live with them, but you will be permitted to visit them. Uso shifted in his seat and quickly held up his hand. Additionally, the commission is willing to support them so long as you work for us. This includes food, utilities, and schooling. Junko let out a laugh and glanced at the contract sitting on her lap. It kind of feels like you're using them as a bargaining chip. I am. Uso's face didn't even flinch at his brutal honesty. The board believes that you're ideal for this kind of program, and we're willing to buy your compliance. Oh, this felt like a conversation that was too much for a single 15-year-old to have. Still, a better life for her little brother and sister. Special training. But not living with them anymore. No going to UA. No meeting Perseverance. Well, that last part wasn't true. If she worked with the commission, she'd probably still meet him. Can I think about it? Absolutely. Uso nodded. The rest of the car ride was spent with Uso answering any questions she had and trying to sell her on the program. 2 nights later, during a late February snowstorm, they lost power, and Junko signed her name by candlelight. The luxury apartment felt like a prison. It felt less like a home than when she shared a space that was less than her bedroom with both her little brother and sister. She was locked high up in a building owned by the HPSC. For a while, it had been great. The training she had received had made her into a formidable hero and had boosted her skill far beyond what she could have reached on her own. She had a team of trainers, the best of the best, with some pulling double duties, acting as her chauffeur, doctor, nutritionist, and so many more. Then she found out what exactly they were training her to do. Junko peeled off her double set of sports bras and haphazardly tossed them into the laundry hamper and scored a direct bullseye. She stopped and glared at the hamper for a moment and then marched over towards it, pulling out the BR and dropping it onto the ground in an open act of defiance against her life. Just because she never missed a shot didn't mean she had to be a neat freak. Once completely stripped, she grabbed a towel and headed towards her shower. When she had first moved in, she had been so completely amazed by her bathroom, not just at its size, but by how clean it was. The white tiles on the floor had stayed white, and she could still see her own reflection in the mirror. Back then, she'd vowed to take a bath every single day. She hadn't had a proper bath in months. With a dry look, Junko looked at herself in the mirror. She had certainly grown up since she moved here. She was taller by a good several inches. She was more womanly as well, and her muscles were well defined thanks to her near-constant training. Her hair was now long enough to form a long ponytail that stretched past her shoulder blades. But the most shocking thing about growing up was, just how dead inside I look, she mumbled and tossed her towel on the counter. The warm water of her shower felt good. Physically. But the water just reminded her of that night. The night of her first kill half a year ago. Rain stirred up by the heavy wind pelted her in the face while her hair occasionally blocked her field of vision, but she kept her breath steady and the eyes on the target. She had trained for this. She could make shots from further away in typhoon conditions. This summer storm had nothing on her. She balanced on a thin wire that came from the advanced gear the HPSC had provided her, allowing her to snipe from anywhere. Normally, the surface level of a building would be fine, but to get a clean look this time, she required a less than ideal vantage point nestling her between two buildings. The scope of her rifle shifted, and she looked towards the target building. She was hunting for a man, a Yakuza gambling lord with a history of culinary expertise. He was simply known as Fujimaki. She had seen a few photos of him. He was tall, had a stern, handsome face and a set of broad shoulders. The question would be whether or not he would show up tonight. The normally dark restaurant was lit up for once, and both she and her watchers were hopeful that they might actually get a visual tonight. It wasn't her first time playing recon. Her rifle made her great at scouting for a team of pros or the police, and since she kept her distance, she could help them out despite not making her official hero debut yet. Yuso kept making claims that she'd be allowed to do so spring of next year to keep in line with the other graduates. If she was at UA, she would have already made her debut. Her Woodhave Bean classmates were already making a name for themselves, particularly the rabbit hero Mirko. It was so frustrating. Despite all the HPSC had done for her and her family, she couldn't help but feel like she had made a mistake. Her eyes widened when she saw movement in the restaurant that dominated the middle floor of a luxury building. "I'm seeing movement." "Good," Jinpei's voice called over her earpiece, more to tell her that they were still listening than to give her instructions. She knew what to do. "There's an older woman, she's wearing a black flower kimono. Her hair is gray, and she's about 5'2". Junko hummed, trying to find anything to identify the woman. "The target? No visual yet? Keep us notified?" She mentally nodded, her eyes locked on her target as she continued to survey the building. A couple of cars came and went down below, and more people began to appear in the building. Some looked almost like her target, but none matched his description exactly. Of note, there was a second person of importance that appeared, an older man wearing traditional Japanese clothing. Beside him stood a young man wearing a mask over his face. Again, no one that was really striking or too important. They talked for what seemed like hours, the warm rain making Junko miss her apartment, more importantly the fact that it was dry. Eventually he emerged. Dressed in a set of green slacks and vest with a black shirt, he was every bit as confident as the other two members. For a moment, Junko found herself pulled into the invisible battle of wills that was taking place between the three persons of interest. Target sighted. Junko felt her BLD rush as she had nearly forgotten to do her job. "Good," Jinpei's voice was as firm as ever. "Take the shot." "Understood, I'll." She froze. "What?" "Take the shot." USO's voice replaced Jinpei's. He was there. But the police and heroes we had in reserve got called to another emergency. She paused and looked towards the target again. She had a clean line of shot. Even if the glass was bulletproof, she'd be able to get a shot through. "But I'm a hero. And that man has been organizing a villain group in his territory. He's gathering strength. If he continues on, then countless others will die." Yuso's usually emotionless voice was filled with a spark of rage that made Junko question if she was in the right here. Kill him so others might live. "But, shouldn't we?" She bit her lip. She could do it. With a thought, she could pull the trigger and he would be dead. But that wasn't what a hero was. Heroes didn't kill people. Shouldn't he be brought in then? "He's too dangerous." Yuso's voice drifted into her ear before he sighed. It almost sounded like the hiss of a snake. "He's already killed many heroes and debtors, your mother and father among them." Junko's eyes went wide and she stared at the man. Rage filled her heart as she thought back to her mother. Back to the home her family used to have. It was his fault. It was his fault that she lost her family. He lured your father in, got him in debt, got your mother involved and killed both of them. Yuso's voice was colder than the rain. Take the shot. Fujimaki fell over, blood pouring from the fresh hole in his skull that was a perfect reflection of the one that had formed in the window. The calmness of the scene was bizarre. The other two persons of interest looked over at the body, then at each other. A finger pointed, a shrug. They turned towards her direction. Their eyes weren't focusing on her specifically, but still they held up their glasses and toasted her first kill before resuming their meeting as though nothing had happened. It was so calm. She was so calm. Junko looked at the smoke rising from her barrel and watched as a bit of rain sizzled at its end. Her first kill had been toasted by a bunch of Yakuza. Nagant. Yuso's voice boomed in her ear. Did you take the shot? Target. She spoke on instinct, her breath caught in her throat as she stared at him. At the man she had just killed. She had never heard him speak. Did she do the right thing? Target? She repeated. Terminated. Terminated. Not neutralized. You did the right thing. It didn't feel like the right thing. You saved countless lives tonight. At the cost of taking one. Report back to base. She didn't. Not right away. She sat on the roof of some random building and watched the rain fall. She didn't even remember firing her rifle. She didn't even remember hearing the gunshot. She didn't blink. It just happened. Fujimaki deserved to die. But she didn't want to be the one to kill him. The warm water of her shower felt good, its refreshing nature making her feel at ease. 4 more had joined Fujimaki's name on her list of confirmed kills. Nearly one a month. They were all different too. The leader of a terrorist group that was planning on bombing the Diet stood out in her mind the most. They didn't even have the bomb yet. Just plans and an anger directed at the government. Every single one of her kills had been justified in some way. She couldn't count the number of lives that USO said she saved. Did that matter? She never met anyone she got to save. She never got to actually save anyone. She just killed and got told she was saving lives. The shower didn't so much as creak when she turned it off. The cold wall of her shower felt good against her back as she slowly slid to a sitting position. She stared at her arm, her quirk, her rifle, and let out a long miserable sigh. Couple more years and she could start drinking in the shower. That sounded like a great way to cope with being a murderer. She stared at the white wall of her shower for a while, noting the complete lack of imperfections on it. No soap scum. No watermarks. No rust. It was perfect and pristine in every imaginable way. Its cleanliness almost pissed her off. She activated her quirk, arm going behind her head as she heavily debated shooting a hole in her shower just so it wouldn't look less impure than she felt. It wasn't fair to use this place daily. But no matter what, her shower never got any dirtier, and she never felt any cleaner. How many more people was she going to kill before she became a hero? She retracted her rifle and placed her hand on top of her head and let out a sigh that was starting to sound a lot like a sob. After a moment, she heard her front door open. Hey sis. May's voice carried through the small apartment. I have a new baby. Just for you. If it was for her family, she could carry on. Give me a second, she called. I'm just getting out of the shower. Junko placed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. Her still damp hair pressed against the loose gray halter top she had taken to parading around in her apartment. The pajama bottoms she had on served as a warning that she was going to relax and that nothing in this world was going to stop her from binging an entire season of whatever was on Netflix and not remember a DMN thing about it. Honestly, she'd probably just be browsing the internet laughing at cat videos and trying desperately not to think about the fact that she was a murderer. She bit her lip and stared at herself in the mirror. Thankfully, the shower had washed away any tear stains before they formed. May might not be the most socially adept person in the world, but she had keen eyes and could notice tear stains from across the room. The last thing she wanted was to worry May. With one last breath, Junko pushed herself off the wall with both hands and wandered out into her apartment. What are you doing to my toaster? May looked up from the largely disassembled machine and gave a great big smile that made her look guilty as SHT, mostly because of the steampunk goggles that were hanging off her head and the screwdriver in her hand. You were taking too long. I was drying off. Tries. Your hair is still wet. May bounced over to her, her school uniform already disheveled and out of place. Do you want me to make you a better one? I can. I'd rather keep my hair, May. Junko let out a sigh and smiled at her little sister. The school uniform she was wearing was different. What's with your outfit? Did you have to change schools again? No. May made a face and flapped her arms. She took a step back and spun like their mother used to do whenever they got new clothes. May stumbled for a moment and braced herself against the counter. This is my middle school uniform. Oh. Junko had to blink back and stare at her little sister for a moment. She wasn't as short as she was a few years ago, but it still felt like shell shock with how tall May had gotten. Was she really 12 now? Did she lose a year? You look good, May, I'm proud of you. Junko placed a hand on her shoulder and smiled. How's Otto doing? Ugh, some repair shop hired him, Junko knew that much, and then he got promoted and the owner liked him a lot, and now he basically runs the shop. May shrugged. At least that's what he said. Good. Junko scratched the back of her head and glanced towards her couch for a moment. Hey, why don't we sit down and we can? She stopped. She was using her right arm and bending her elbow right at May. She tucked her right arm behind her and stepped away. Girl talk? Oh no thanks. May chirped, spinning back towards the toaster. I need to fix your toaster before I go. Jinpei said I only had a bit before I had to go, and you spent most of that in the bathroom. Yeah, sorry. She walked over towards May and stood on the other side of the counter from her, watching her deftly use her screwdriver to fix her toaster with ease. The mechanical prowess that her siblings shared had at one point made her jealous that she didn't have anything like that to make her stand out, but now, she just thought it was amazing. She missed the smell of grease and the grinding of gears. I'll, try to find time to visit you guys more often. May tilted her head at her. Why? Aren't you upset that we haven't seen each other in months? May shrugged. Not really. You're busy with stuff, and so's Otto, so I have plenty of time to work on my babies, and Jinpei does a good job at making sure I go to school. The tall bald man that had become May's pseudo-guardian gave a curt thumbs up from his post just inside her apartment. Besides, I know how strong you work to make sure I can make my babies, and so that Otto could go to trade school. May's smile never faded as she tinkered away on the microwave. So, it's fine if you can't see us all that much. Besides, May looked up at her, her face scrunched up. I'm not a people person. You dork. Junko laughed and stepped around the counter, then pulled her little sister into a tight hug. You big stupid smart dork. She could smell the oil in May's hair. Well, thanks for coming to see me then. Apparently, she needed it far more than her sister did. Oh. May wiggled free from the hug and reached into her bag. I didn't actually come here to visit you. Junko shot a quick glare towards Jinpei. If they were trying to recruit May? Here. May pulled out a small device. A transparent lightning bolt made up roughly half of it, followed by a more complex-looking part that looked like it was made to hook around her ear. I'm super proud of this baby. Try it on. May, Junko could almost feel a tear welling up in her eyes. Her little sister was making her gear. Their mother would be so proud. Hell, she was so proud. Otto must be over the moon. They should go for a family dinner or something nice to celebrate this. She pushed her hair to the side and slid the earpiece to the side. The slight yellow tint of the glass made the world appear just a bit brighter, which might be the most important thing right now. What's it do? Junko asked, bouncing alongside May as she felt her smile spread. Hold on. May jumped to her side and began to poke the scouter. She felt a bit of pressure, and then numbers and information began to form in the corner of her vision. Everything she could need from wind direction to humidity was there just waiting for her. It runs a real-time analysis on the current weather and double-checks with local forecasting data. Otto helped me run tests during the last storm we had. Wasn't that a typhoon? But since you're making such long-range shots and you have to adjust for that kind of stuff, I figured this would help you when you become a hero. May flailed her arms and gave a maniacal laugh. And then when you become super famous, you'll tell everyone who makes your gear and it'll be me. And then I'll make lots of money. When did you become such a money grubber, May? When I realized that I need money to make lots of babies. Well, She wasn't wrong. Mei might well be the most brilliant engineer of their generation, but she applied a simple logic to absolutely everything else in life that made Junko question how long before her sister exploded. Speaking of which, this isn't going to explode, is it? Nope. Mei pushed her hair out of the way and showed her unscorched ear. I tested it myself. It's 100% unexplodable. Junko pulled her little sister in an awkward hug that had Mei standing there stiff for a few moments before she returned the hug. Thank you, Mei. I'll make sure to use it when I'm a hero. But let me know how useful it is. I'll work strong so you can have more custom gear made by me. Mei gave another giggle and pushed out of the hug. It's a good thing you're pretty too. You'll make a great model. Junko rolled her eyes and ruffled her sister's constantly messy hair that shared a similar texture to her own. Just make sure you do good in school. Do you know where you want to go? You wait. Mei announced, one arm going up into the air. They have the biggest budget for support students, and with all the good heroes coming out of there, I'll be able to get some good customers early. Her family was anything but normal. Well, you're going to have to study strong. Oh, I know. Mei took a step back and then lunged forward, hugging Junko with her full body. Just stay safe, all right? I will. Mei is a genius, Junko muttered for the 100th time as she switched through the settings of her new scouter again. Temperature maps, elevation, wind direction, including the hard-to-predict city winds, and so much more was available to her. All of this was going to make her more accurate and faster at firing. Not only that, but the heat map function could assist her with rescues. A smile fell upon her as she leaned back in her seat, staring out at the city for a few more moments until her smile faded. She took the scouter off and placed it carefully down onto her table. Then she felt that happiness from her sister's visit vanish, leaving just an empty feeling in its wake that was slowly being filled up with those thoughts again. Soon she'd be allowed to go out there and be a true hero, one that saved lives instead of just taking them. Just a bit longer until she could start her redemption. But how many people would she have to kill until there weren't any left? It had to end somewhere, right? She ran her fingers through her hair and found her throat tight like it was swollen, and the urge to vomit swelled up inside of her. Head in her hands, she thought. She thought about what she would do. About what she could do. About what she should do. The door to her apartment opened, but the annoyance of her privacy being disregarded was smothered by the pit that fell in her stomach. The only time they came to her room was when she had an urgent assignment. She would either be taken to a meeting room or given a name and a place right here in her own home. A home she had earned through BLDUSO walked in, his lithe frame barely a shadow in the darkness she was sitting in with only the city lights providing any sort of illumination. This man represented the necessary evil of this world, someone trying desperately to keep the peace that heroes had brought, no matter the cost. But he was also the man that had robbed her of her innocence. He shared each and every drop of BLD she spilt. He stood across from her, the small round table she used to enjoy her tea between them. With his free hand he pointed towards Mei's scouter. We can have our text put in the earpiece if you want to use it. Jean, no, she swiped the scouter away and pulled it as far away from him as she could. I'm only going to use this when I'm a hero. Not when I'm doing your dirty deeds. If USO was offended he didn't show it. When can I make my debut? She half glared at him. I'm more than ready for it. I'm 18 years old. If she had been working for anyone else, she could leave and take a test to get her hero's license. But she worked for the place that gave out those licenses. Yuso reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope and slapped it onto the table. Ideally you'd wait, but this might help you focus. Junko felt her eyes nearly pop out of her head and she swiped the envelope up with one hand and felt a small firm square nestled between some paper. Is this your license? USO offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It isn't valid until next week, but no one will bother you for it if you start early. She wanted to jump up, get dressed, and run out that door to perform her first acts of true heroism. But she stopped when she saw the folder tucked under USO's arms. You have a task for me, don't you? He nodded and carefully placed the folder onto the table. Your next assignment. A hero has been working with a villain group. We need you to take them out. You? She paused and stared at the name for a moment. King Raid. She had heard of his name before. He used to be near the top 10, but had fallen down in rankings the last few years. You want me to kill a hero? A hero that's been working with a villain group in an attempt to boost his numbers, as well as using his brother to commit mass insurance fraud. We can estimate that 100 people so far have been killed because of this collaboration. But, can't we just arrest him? She looked at his photo again. King Raid was still pretty young. I mean, he could just be desperate and still want to be a hero. Shouldn't that count for something? Yuso let out a sigh that twisted itself into a grunt. Did. But we have to draw the line somewhere. If this were to get out, it wouldn't take much for people to start losing faith in the heroes of Japan. They'd start asking questions about how many heroes are legit. Start losing faith, start panicking. And we can't just leave him be with all the lives he's ruining. You eliminating him is the best solution. But, she flipped over to the next page of his information. Her eyes were easily able to read in the low light of her room. Something all but leapt out of the page at her. He has such a huge insurance premium on this orphanage. USO nodded. That's why you have to do this tonight. It's likely that's the next building that will be destroyed. Her hands shook, and she felt like all the sugar in her BLD had vanished, leaving naught but a hollow dullness that tore through her mind. How fitting. The night she became a hero was also the night she became a hero killer. How many drops were in a puddle? In a pool? In the ocean? How many until each kill would feel inconsequential to the ocean of BLD she had already spilled? Would she drown in this BLD? Junko steadied her shot, once again staring at a midnight meeting between villains. And that's what King Raid was. A villain wearing the mask of a hero. The quick bit of research she was able to do was more than enough to tell her just what kind of a man he was. He was mean, angry, and many of the people he rescued reported broken arms or various injuries that likely could have been prevented. There were even photos of him at an illegal dogfight. But he still put his life on the line to save people. He was still a hero. And she had to kill him. An orphanage filled with children was on the line. An orphanage that King Raid had been operating for half a decade. I suppose, she muttered just under her breath so the comms device wouldn't pick up on it. It's better to die a hero. Her eyes felt moist and she sniffed against the cool winter air. The gray crowds on the horizon spoke of a coming winter storm. A fitting way to bring in the new year. Don't worry, she spoke softly. I'll erase your sins. What was that? USO's agitated voice sounded from her earpiece and put her on edge. Nothing. Junko squared her shoulders and kept her eyes locked on the target. Why was it always in an abandoned warehouse? How many abandoned warehouses were there in Tokyo? Was it even abandoned? I've confirmed the target. She glanced at King Raid's car. He's having a meeting. How many? I think it might be the whole group. They didn't have exact numbers on the group King Raid worked with. There's over a dozen of them. I can't verify, my angle is bad. USO's voice was cold. Cold enough for someone to order a hit without a second thought. Taking on a group that large is a bad idea, even with someone of your skill. Wait until King Raid is isolated and take him out. After you confirm the kill, we'll send someone to discover the body and report the villain group for being in the area. Or blame Stain. There was a bite to her voice. Stain had been the official reason for 2 of her kills so far. It wasn't a matter of pride, but she hated that people would readily believe her actions were the actions of the hero killer. Though, by the end of tonight, he'd be sharing that title. Not this time. She closed her eyes and kept her mouth shut tight. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw her hands up in the air and quit. She wanted to be a hero. Not a murder. Please, her scream came out as a plea that only she could hear. Someone please. Save me. No help came. She continued her watch, rifle at the ready, finger twirling in her hair as she formed and reformed a bullet in anticipation. Part of her was hoping the clean shot never came, that she'd be forced to stay out here all night until USO or whoever took over called it off and she could go home and be the one to laugh at her own demons for once. Movement from the front of the building caught her attention. What is it? She almost forgot about her earpiece. Someone jumped over their wall and she saw the impact from the door being kicked in before the sound reached her and her heart started racing. Something was happening. Someone was there. Someone's there. What? Who? Yuso sounded furious. I don't know, She found herself smiling when she caught a glimpse of him. A sleek green suit, a mop of messy green hair, and a body that just screamed hero. The next #1 hero in Japan, and as of this moment her hero. It's Perseverance. Fuso swore. Nagant, fall back, there's nothing we can. She followed the action happening inside and saw a villain building up a massive ball of electricity. She fired 2 shots, one to shatter the window, followed by a second shot that slammed into the hands of the man gathering the electricity, sending him flying into the wall where her sticky hair bullet kept him pinned. Nagant. She grabbed some of the special ammo the HPSC had created for her. In this case, it was a zip line. She shot once towards the warehouse and once again on the roof she stood on, the bullet embedding itself deep into the structure. The line was barely taut when she jumped onto it. Nagant. What the F? She laughed, a wave of freedom swallowing up her sense of responsibility. I'm going to help Perseverance. Bullshit. Get back here now. The mission is bullshit. She pulled her legs up to avoid colliding with another building. She kicked, pushing up off of it, gaining a bit more momentum, and keeping her rifle steady. I'm a hero now, aren't I? Yuso said nothing, which was in many ways worse than anything he could have said. She flew in through the broken window, her rifle firing twice, disabling 2 more villains before her feet even hit the ground. A third caught wind of her and started to use his quirk. Another shot and he was out for the count. All those hours spent perfecting non-lethal techniques had finally paid off in glorious success. Oh. She turned and saw Perseverance standing in the hallway with the jaws of a large shark-mouthed villain being casually held back with his hands in the same way she would hold back May. Now that was an entrance. But she fired another round at a villain that was sneaking up on Perseverance. Thanks. Perseverance turned and looked at the guy she had just pinned to the wall. Wait, is that your arm? That's amazing. Yeah. Was this what it was like with normal heroes? Was Perseverance normal? What's even going on? And shouldn't we focus on fighting? Perseverance looked at the large shark mouth he was currently holding at bay. Oh right, sorry, you were just so cool I lost track of where I was. He slammed the shark's mouth shut and slammed him into the wall with a casual amount of force. I'm Perseverance, by the way. I'm aware. Alright. Sorry, not used to being popular. He laughed and pointed down the hallway. She hopped on her feet and chased after him, delivering a shot to the shark-headed man to keep him pinned to the wall. So who are you? I'd remember someone with a cool quirk like yours. He asked her so casually, like they weren't even in the middle of what was probably an illegal raid on a villain raid. What was he even doing here? What was she even doing here? What was she going to tell him? I'm Lady Nagant. She was telling an honest to blue hero her name. She felt like she might explode with joy. And she was even teaming up with him. She had never been so happy about something going wrong. It's nice to meet you. Likewise. Perseverance turned the corner and casually tossed a charging villain against the wall, while she followed up by taking out the 2 that were trying to flee. We make a great team. Oh hey, what's that stuff you're shooting? Your hair. Junko nodded, feeling her cheeks flushed. It was probably just the fact that for the past couple of years her only social interactions had been the HPSC and her own family, neither of which were socially normal. Maybe completely missing the high school social life was a terrible idea. Yeah, I can make bullets out of my hair to cause different effects, like sticky or just blunt force. Or kill. Well, that's useful. Another villain was just casually backhanded to the side and she fired down one that was trying to fly away. Huh, he was right, they did make a good team. But what were you doing here, Lady Nagant? Perseverance asked her as they went up the stairs. And by going up the stairs she meant him jumping up through a hole in the roof and then offering her a hand up. It was kind of exciting how easy it was for him to just pick her up. Wait, did she just get a crush on the first guy her age she'd talked to in years? No, that would be silly. But at the same time, she could do a lot worse than crushing on Perseverance. Something she shared with half the population of Japan. Oh, I was scouting the area and I heard you kick in the door. Oh right, yeah, it wouldn't open and a guy was talking to me and I panicked. He so casually pulled a door completely out of its frame and looked at it like he had F up. Don't tell All Might. If I ever meet him I'll panic and tell him exactly what happened. Honestly, that's valid. He looked into the room and frowned. Oh, so the rumor was true. Nagant looked into the room and verified her target. King Raid was laying on a large plush bed, the smell of issei beer and drags lofted out of the room and commanded her to turn her head. Disgust filled her and she fired off her rifle at maximum power. The chain that kept the young girl bound shattered, and she ran out of the room screaming and crying. Nagant, Perseverance growled. You get her to safety, I'll have a few words with King Raid here. She nodded. Punch him extra strong for me. He nodded, a smile spreading across his face. Extra strong, you say? She heard the scream of a man as she ran down the stairs after the girl. She activated her earpiece. Listen. Can you hear me? Can you get the police here? Silence. FPS 30. They're on their way. Jinpei's voice answered. The president is furious. Good. Was she allowed to smile after all that happened? She had just violated a direct order from Yusuf. She was going to be in trouble for sure. But she had helped save some young girls and 6 or so dogs that were bound for the fighting pits. And there was the villain group. She had shot their leader without even knowing it, and only a few of them managed to escape. All of those were good things. She had done good. True good. Hey, Perseverance stood next to her and nudged her shoulder slightly. Smile, you gotta let people know everything is all right. Oh, I can. I thought because this was serious, I shouldn't. He waved his hand and looked towards the cops as they did their cleanup routine. Who taught you that it's a hero's job to rescue people with a smile? She let out a breath and let her natural smile come out and beamed up at Perseverance. He matched her smile and placed both hands on his hips. Didn't killer smile. Sorry about that, I've kind of been homeschooled in heroics. Homeschooled? His smile vanished. Oh. Are you a vigilante? Oh no. She fished for her hero license. Still in its letter, she had placed it between her bare skin and her bodysuit. She had been in a rush and had just taken it to remind her what she was fighting for. She handed it to Perseverance. In the dim street light, it even looked like he was blushing. Sorry if it's a bit moist, I just got it today. She was showing her hero license to Perseverance. The Perseverance. That had to mean something, right? This isn't dated until next week? Oh, she shrugged. They said no one would bother me about that. He handed her back her envelope. I bet they would. They probably messed up on the date and couldn't be bothered to fix it. Like mine. He scrambled into one of his pouches and pulled out a set of licenses. Look how they spelled my name in English. It's Deku. Just because Izuku and Deku have the same kanji does not mean it's okay to not look at the rest of my information. He switched to the more recent license. I got this one just last year. Ah, so the HPSC was mildly incompetent. But where'd you study at? I mean, your moves were amazing. And the way you came in through the window was so badass. It was like I was watching an anime or something. He flailed his massive arms and continued to smile at her. So this was what friends felt like. Oh, I was actually taught at the HPSC. Really? Honestly, that just makes you all the more impressive, Junko. You're pretty great yourself, Izuku. It felt like they stared at each other for a long time, and they would have for much longer, but a cop had to interrupt them. Junko honestly had no idea if she was in trouble or not. On the one hand, she didn't get the usual pep talk after the mission from Yuso, but on the other hand, she hadn't been lambasted by how she should follow orders or anything like that. She had entered her home and had been able to sleep peacefully for what felt like the first time in years. She dreamed of the beach and playing volleyball with Izuku. Mostly because she couldn't get him out of her head. She had teamed up with her first real hero. She had saved someone. A few sweet girls that were in desperate need of saving. If she had simply killed King Raid, those girls wouldn't have been saved. With her face buried into her pillow, she kicked her legs and let out a set of giggles that made her feel like she was 13 again and had just gotten a text from a boy she liked. With a laugh, she flopped onto her back and stared up at her ceiling. It looked different this early in the morning. She was used to staring at it at night. Things just seemed brighter. I think. She held up her hand to block the sunlight. Her cheeks hurt from smiling since she had woken up. Had she ever woken up this happy? I might be addicted to saving people. It felt so different. Was she allowed to talk about this? She wanted to take Otto and May out to lunch and talk about this. Tell them that their big sister was finally a hero. And that she got to team up with Perseverance. Wait, maybe leave that last part out. May would probably try to sell him gear. Nah, it was too much to gloat about. I can't wait to get out there again. She blinked and looked over to her table where her wallet and some of her gear still Saturday wait. She sat up and kept her eyes locked onto her wallet. Nothing's stopping me from just going on patrol right now, is there? She had her license and free access to an armory of gear. And she was feeling fantastic. Beyond fantastic. There was probably no better time than to run out there and go on patrol. No more sticking to the shadows and trying to be an unseen killer. She opened her nightstand and pulled out the scouter May had made her and one of her favorite hair ties. Wait. She blinked and looked down at herself. Last night she had stumbled around all dopey and happy and went straight to bed giggling to herself. I should probably shower before I go on my first patrol. When she got out, she found a message waiting for her. Yuso wanted to talk. Junko, Yuso kept his hands folded against his desk, a clear sign that he was annoyed, but that logic and pragmatism had won over his emotions. Out of all his traits, Junko had learned that Yuso was above all else level-headed. Though, given what happened last night, she was starting to question his methods. Killing should be a last resort. What she and Izuku did last night felt far more acceptable. With her shoulders back and her head held high, she gave him a small respectable nod. She was ready for whatever he was going to say. Without a word, he picked up the remote that was on his desk and turned on the several large screens that were along his wall. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? A female reporter said. How many other supposed heroes have made deals like this? She slapped her desk. We've heard about this in the United States before. The question must be asked. Another reporter asked, an older man with wild white hair that avoided the top of his head. Was this simple heroism on Perseverance's part? Or was this revenge for a deal gone bad? King Raid's trial might shed new light on the so-called Golden Boy. Quirks are a corruption of the human spirit. A live video showed a monk standing on a podium, his head shaved bald. And those who use them are evil. This goes for heroes as well. It is only a matter of time before all who use their quirks succumb to the temptation of power. It's a problem, another woman spoke. Heroes have gone unchecked for too long. Each and everyone needs to be investigated. But we can't trust the police. Start. The screens went silent and Junko felt angry. One bad hero and people did this. Where was their gratitude? Where was the cheering? Where was respect? She turned towards Yuso and felt her rifle shaking inside of her arm. Why are they saying that? Those stations have an anti-hero bias, and they generally have a small base. Today their viewership doubled, but should die back down quickly if nothing else happens. Yuso replied calmly. If the larger news stations join on, then we'll really be in trouble, but most of them are covering King Raid's arrest more respectfully. We've seen it happen in other countries, Yuso continued. A few corrupt heroes and public opinion of heroes start to fall, villains begin to rise, they rebrand themselves as reformers, chaos, death. I'm sure you studied history. Junko could only nod. That's why what you do here is important. Yuso let out a long sigh and pulled on his tie. It looked older than before. Much older. Well, at least part of the reason. You have a dirty job, Junko, but a needed one. In my opinion, you're more of a hero than Perseverance for what you've done. That didn't make her feel good. This piece might have been built by All Might, but you're the one running around and fixing all the leaks? Yuso groaned and pinched the bridge of his nose. It's a shame about what happened last night, but I felt like it's important for you to see what happens when we don't send you. Yuso stood and walked towards the window. When a hero dies, there are laws in place that prevent the media from covering it. I've been trying to push for similar legislation when a hero gets arrested, but no luck. Silence drifted into the room like a thick fog that choked the words from her mouth before they could even gasp for air. Jinpei told me you might be concerned I was angry with you. Yuso took a deep breath and stared out at the city. I apologize, I took my anger out on you. Really, I was more angry at Perseverance showing up out of nowhere. I still don't even know what he was doing there. Well, Junko shrugged and drew Yuso's cold gaze towards her like a dumbass. On the bright side, I got to meet Perseverance. That'll probably help my reputation. Truth be told, I don't care about your reputation as a hero. Yuso lowered his gaze and pulled out a cigarette from his suit. She'd never seen him smoke before, and the lack of any strong scent and ashtray told her why. With the flick of a lighter, Yuso took a long drag of his cigarette. You're most useful to us all in the shadows. But, Junko took a step forward, isn't that why you trained me? To be a hero. Yuso's silence let her answer that question herself. Because of her quirk, the training of hero and assassin were one and the same. You couldn't tell a little girl you were training her to be a killer. He took another long drag. Don't get me wrong, we still need strong and capable heroes. We won't stop you from being a hero, and will continue to support you with gear. So long as I keep killing for you. There was no bite to her question, there was no accusation. She was simply stating the truth. Yeah. An amazing discovery she found was that hero work cleared her mind. Unless she counted the just walking around and thinking part of going on patrol, which did the exact opposite and filled her mind with so much HT, she wouldn't be surprised if her eyes turned brown. Stand down. Junko shouted as she ran towards the large villain that had an entire car in his hand. His body appeared to be made of thick red plates that fell down his frame like body armor. Giant villains seemed like they would be tough, and since this guy looked to be built like a brick shithouse in every sense of the word, she might have her hands full with him. Stay back, the villain yelled, tears falling down his eyes. He's cheating on me. Right now. He's cheating on me. Geesh, seriously? Okay. Junko scratched the back of her head and looked at the car. The metal was being crushed, but the people inside were still safe, even as they screamed their heads off. Look, guys, Junko romantic experience. Zero giant brick monster. Actually had a relationship. I get that, but that's no reason to, Miko. The brick shithouse of a monster screeched and tossed the car about. You're cheating on me with my best friend. Why was this SHT so complicated? It's because she has giant tips. Isn't it? The villain roared and pulled her. I'm back. I'm going to. Junko fired a shot right at the villain's face. It did no damage and just plinked helplessly to the side. I get SHT sucks, but think about this. You're one of them. The villain poked a finger at her. One of the Busta girls that has it so easy getting a guy. All you have to do is... I've never had a boyfriend, she shouted, her face growing red. This hero debut was going fan-fucking-tastic. The villain groaned and looked at her with a mixture of awe and pity. But you're like hot? Thanks. So, I still never had a boyfriend. So look. She lowered her rifle and gave a sigh. I don't know the first thing about romance. Yes, your ex sucks for cheating on you, and your best friend sucks even more, but you need to think about this. If you throw that car, you'll be throwing your freedom away. You'll be placed in jail, branded as a villain for the rest of your life. A look of contemplation fell over the clearly distressed girl's face. But I'm so angry right now. I get that, but that doesn't mean you should throw your life away, does it? The car was dropped into the ground high enough that it probably destroyed what was left of the suspension and engine. But the people inside were safe. The girl that had been inches away from becoming a villain for life quickly shrunk down to reveal a black-haired girl with pale red skin. She ran over and sprinted towards Junko, arms stretched out wide. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. You're okay? Junko patted the girl's back and sighed. No one was hurt, but you'll probably have to go to some anger management classes in the future? Really? The girl pulled her face back, excitement washing over her face. Do you think I'll meet any cute guys there? Honey, you need to work on your priorities. The girl, Branka, was taken into custody, largely as a formality, but also to ensure that she would get the help she needed to prevent another such outburst. The boy and girl that came out of the car had their wounds treated by paramedics, and Junko couldn't help but agree with Branka's statement. Miko did have a massive pair of honkers. Good job. Junko jumped nearly a foot when she realized that Izuku was standing right beside her in his full hero costume. Holy F. A bit of warning. Where did you even come from? Izuku just shrugged and smiled at her. Sorry about that, I have a habit of showing up when people need rescuing. Well, that's kind of your job, but why sneak up on me? She pouted and rubbed the back of her head, feeling her cheeks grow warm at his attention. Oh, 'cause it was funny. Izuku made it so strong to be even remotely mad at him. But don't worry, I was fully prepared to step in and help, but you didn't need it at all. You did a great job talking that villain down. Thanks, I think. She sighed and smiled. She kept her head down, but looked up at him through the corner of her eye. Still, not what I was expecting for today. Yeah, the morally gray ones are always tricky, but at least you ask first, shoot second, then ask again. Izuku rolled his eyes and glanced off into the distance. I know more than a few people that punch first. Is it bad if I say it was mostly because I was trying to figure out what would be effective against a literal brick without killing her? Nope. Well, that's good. Hey. Izuku clapped his hands together. Since we worked so well together last night, what do you say we go on patrol together? That was strong to say no to. How often do you fight against giant slime monsters? Junko swung from her grappling line, keeping an eye on the building-sized blob of sentient jelly that was making its way downtown. Buried deep within its mass was a glowing core that looked to be both its brain and eyeball. Many people were running away from it, less for their lives, and more to avoid getting their clothes stained by what amounted to sentient grape jam. Sure, it was technically acidic, but no more so than orange juice. It was just a mess, and its body could easily destroy roads. Izuku's voice drifted over Mei's communication device like he was whispering in her ear. Leave it to her sister to accidentally make communication ever so slightly RDC by making it function far too good. I don't know, too many times. All right, she shouted and surveyed the area as she landed onto the ground in front of the jelly-based creature. The civilians are clear. Ready when you are. Right. Let's see how good your aim is. She sighed and watched as Izuku got a running start before throwing in a blinking object that looked like a thermos her sister would make for soup. The sentient slime jiggled and wiggled at the abrupt and violent impact. She took a breath and loaded one of her explosive rounds and sighed. This technically wasn't a person, just a creature born from someone's quirk. It was like swatting a bug. Or eating a mushroom. Jeech, she was going to end up a vegetarian, wasn't she? The hole Izuku made was closing quickly, and she needed a clean shot to detonate the explosive. She fired and hit the thermos dead on. A bright light gathered inside the creature as its tendrils flailed in several directions at once. Then it exploded. Everywhere. Nagant squeaked when the wave of purple goo slammed into her, completely covering her in a substance that was like barfed-up grape jelly and smelled just as foul. For a moment, she kept her eyes shut as she just embraced this gooey feeling of being a successful hero. Izuku spat and sputtered through their comms again and let out a slight laugh. So that's what it's like being on the outside. Thanks, Nagant. Last time I had to dive in and detonate it myself, I'm pretty sure Recovery Girl would stop healing me if I did that again. She hummed and then scraped the slime off of her face and shook what she could off before she dared to take a breath. Rotten grape jelly. She groaned and felt her hair. Please tell me this stuff is easy to wash out. Izuku laughed and stood next to her. Yeah, sorry about that. I guess I owe you dinner. Junko would have widened her eyes had it not been for the gunk still fused to that. Dinner from Perseverance. Now that sounded great. She tried to return her rifle back into her arm but found it stuck. She fired again and a thick trail of purple sludge spurted out of it instead. She glanced up at Izuku. A good dinner, he corrected. A really good dinner. You know, she smiled up at him and shook her barrel out more vigorously. I think I can get used to going on patrol with you. That's great. The last person that got good stopped talking to me. Junko just shrugged and looked at her grape jelly-covered body. Right, so, I think we both need to wash up? Izuku nodded. Sure, I'll text you the spot. Sounds great. Junko smiled as she leaned back into her bathtub. It had been far too long since she had actually relaxed in it. She gave a soft groan and stuck her leg out of the water and inspected her toes for a moment. She still wasn't sure how the jam had gotten into her boots, but at this point, it was her caretaker's problem to get that gear ungunked. At least it wasn't her only set either. Still, She had managed to clean the gunk out of her hair and body in the hazmat room, giving her plenty of time to relax and think about her day. Patrolling with Izuku was intense. Not because he walked fast, which he did, but she didn't have a problem keeping up with him. It was mostly the fact that in the 6 hours she had spent with him, they had fought nearly 12 villains and finished it off with a giant slime monster. With a content sigh, she grabbed her foot and gave it a light rub. It was the good kind of sore, like how sore her cheeks felt from just today. Her phone vibrated from the countertop just out of arm's reach. And realization set in. She was going to go to dinner with another hero, dressed in her civilian clothes. She was going to dinner with Perseverance. She was going to dinner with Izuku, a taller, older man that was very attractive. Is this a date? Junko sunk down into her tub and eyed the phone carefully for a few moments. She'd never gone on a date. At least, not a real one. Sure, she had lunch with a boy or two in middle school, but that wasn't a date. But going out to a good dinner with someone like Izuku, that could probably be a date. Maybe. What if it was? Was she allowed to date? Wait, she was a grown but adult. She could date Izuku if she wanted. Did she want to? She completely submerged herself into her bath and felt her cheeks burn at the implications. Was she seriously crushing on the first guy to smile at her? Then again, the first guy was also Perseverance, who she was pretty sure she had a slight crush on way back when he first debuted. God, how much older was he than her? 2 years. 3. Did it matter? With a gasp for air, she flung her head back out of the tub, sending water everywhere thanks to her long hair. It took less than a moment for her to place both hands onto her cheeks and stare at the mineral-rich water of her bath. What the heck? She was a trained killer, but the idea of even a hint of romance had her panicking. Maybe she wasn't a grown-ass adult. Okay, but if it was a date and she liked Izuku, then that meant that he liked her too, so what happened after that? More dates. Was patrolling a date? Sure, it was a lot of work, but it was also a lot of fun. But it wasn't romantic. Nope, bad brain but. She pounded in her temples for a moment and then remembered her phone. The text. She half fell out of the tub and grabbed the phone, deftly navigating her lock screen with a single hand and then swiping it open to reveal Izuku's text. Dinner at Shinryu's? Located on a high-rise and with a killer view of the city, there was not a girl in Tokyo, besides May, that didn't at least know how romantic a single dinner there would be. There was no way this wasn't a date. She had a date with Izuku. She gasped and pulled herself up off the floor. I don't have anything to wear to Shinryu's. She felt like she was dressed to kill. And not in the usual sense. Her clothing reflected her life, with a few casual clothes for when she bothered to go out, mostly consisting of t-shirts, tank tops, a few sweaters, skirts, and pants, many of which were too tight in one area or another. She also had a large selection of workout clothes, which would probably be a bit too revealing unless she wanted to look like some retired yoga guru. Fortunately, she did have something. Yuso, or rather the commission, saw fit to buy her a 3-piece suit each year. It matched what the rest of the agency wore, but it was the only thing she had that would fit a place like Shinryu's. And she looked pretty good in it, even if the seijusti was a bit tight. But was that a bad thing? Junko looked at herself in her hand mirror and stared at the top few buttons of her shirt. She had one undone right now, but how many should she do? 1 for fun. Jinpei held up 1 finger, eyes glued to the road. 2 to flirt, 3 to stuck. Junko stared at her top for a moment and then looked at the 3 fingers Jinpei had raised. She undid 1 extra button and smiled. Thanks, Jinpei. He nodded and took the car off the freeway. Are you sure you don't want me to pick you up? No, it's fine. I'll just be with Perseverance and I don't know how long we'll be. She sighed and watched as the street passed them by. The buildings were too tall to actually see her destination, but she could tell they were getting close. Hey, where'd you learn the button thing? I read it in an article. Jinpei stated firmly and took a moment to smile at her through the rear-view mirror. My little sister was into fashion and I wanted to support her. You have a sister? Jinpei nodded. I did. Oh. Junko sunk into her seat and ran her finger across the back of her neck. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I never told you. What was she like? She was a ray of sunshine and wanted to team up with heroes to model for her. Jinpei's voice was soft and somber. Honestly, you remind me of her a lot, and not because she was about your age. Though if I'm honest, her personality is closer to Mei, single-minded and absolutely brilliant. Junko smiled and leaned forward in the seat. She sounds wonderful. The car came to a slow stop in front of a large, well-lit building. She was. Junko opened the car door and then placed a hand on Jinpei's shoulder. Thanks for the ride, and tell me more about your sister sometime. Just dropping Izuku's name at the front office was enough to get her directed towards a fancy elevator that took her into the upper echelons of the tower. From there, she was guided by a waiter to her table. Shinryu's was everything she had expected it to be. And then there was Izuku. He stood to greet her, the tight sweater he wore somehow showing off more of his defined muscles than his tight hero suit did. It was almost like he was tailored to impress her and groomed to perfection. And she was impressed. Junko, he smiled at her and extended his hand towards her. You look great in a suit. Thanks. She took his hand. Okay, yeah, she was crushing on him. That diamond smile of his, holy CRP. It's really the only thing I have to wear to a place like this. Glad you like it. Well, shall we? He gestured towards their table. She nodded and felt her awkwardness wash away as her night truly began. So, naturally, this results in me and Endeavor being stranded on an island for 2 weeks. Izuku drummed his hands along the table edge and smiled softly as he told a fascinating story about his life being surrounded by so many pros. Somehow I ended up with a tan, and it turns out Endeavor can get sunburned. Oh my gosh. Junko laughed. Touching her glass, she felt the slight bit of condensation that had already gathered wet her fingers. She was so tempted to take a drink, but she couldn't trust herself. Her cheeks already hurt from how much she was smiling that she could feel herself ready to burst into a fit of giggles at the coming punchline. How'd you get off the island? Izuku smiled and took a sip of his drink. Well, eventually we see a passing ship and Endeavor signals them with a giant fire. Needless to say, when we get back, his wife Rei and his kids all started calling him Lobster. Though every time I see her or her daughters Fuyumi and Shoko, they tell me that I look good with a tan. Junko snorted and let out a fit of giggles before she sighed. I'm not so sure. I'd have to see a tan Izuku for myself. Your suspicions are warranted. Izuku let out a light chuckle. In my opinion, I don't look good with a tan. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Here. He presented her with a picture of him and Endeavor sitting on a boat. Endeavor looked like a cooked lobster, like even the slightest move would break his skin. Applying lotion to him was a very bemused woman with long white hair that looked like she was in a constant state of about to break out into laughter. Opposite of Lobster Man was Izuku, who was sitting back as relaxed as he could get. His skin looked caramel, almost like fried rice, especially since his green hair looked like broccoli. Unlike Endeavor, Izuku appeared to be in great spirits, even flashing the camera a smile and a peace sign. But more importantly, okay, but what's with the grass skirt? Junko asked. Not that she was complaining about seeing Izuku's physique in a tank top. He took his phone back and quickly placed it away with a quick shrug. I was stranded for 3 days on an island with Endeavor, and as much as I think NG is a great guy, he's a bit of a goofball. So you made a grass skirt? Izuku shrugged. I didn't have pants. It makes you look like fried rice. But Junko laughed again and shook her head. How does that happen when you're just interning with someone? Honestly, I'm pretty sure most of that is on NG. Izuku scratched his cheek and sighed. What does that mean? You'll know when you meet him. Izuku laughed and tapped on the table. But enough about me, what about you? You must have some stories. She shrugged and stared at her drink for a moment. There was her job as an assassin, but she could feel her smile dying as she took a drink. What would Izuku even think if she told him about that? Honestly, there isn't much. I mostly just got trained by a bunch of dudes in suits and got basic schooling. Even before they took me in, I just kind of went through middle school as the girl that wanted to be a hero. She laughed and scratched the back of her head. Sorry, I'm kind of boring. When I first met you, you literally zip-lined in from a window you shot out and then took out 5 villains in like 10 seconds. Izuku in a serious tone, both hands folded in front of him. You're a certified badass that can have my back any day of the week. He finished with a thumbs up. Junko laughed again, her smile coming back twice as strong. Thanks. I'll be honest, going on patrol with you has been some of the most fun I've had in years. Then let's make it a thing. He flashed both hands at her and he looked just as excited as May whenever she got to talk about her babies. And I'm not talking about you being my sidekick, because you kick way more but than just my side. She snorted. And hopefully less giant slime monsters? If it means I get to go on dates like this, then I'll get slimed every day. Junko felt her cheeks burn. Oh, is this not? I mean, No. Izuku shook his hands in a panic. I think you're really pretty and that you're a certified badass and I like going on patrols with you and stuff, but I didn't really think that this was date and I was actually going to ask if you wanted to hang out more if this went well, and then eventually maybe gather up the courage to ask you out. For a few moments, the room was so silent that Junko could hear her cheeks blushing. Sorry. Izuku lowered his head. I'm not really good at stuff like this. Me neither, Junko muttered just loud enough for Izuku to hear, but I spend all my time locked in a tower and training. What's your excuse? Izuku paused for a moment and then snapped his fingers. I was an awkward kid growing up and I spent the vast majority of my high school career being thrown out of airplanes and being stranded on deserted islands with a living lobster. You were thrown out of an airplane? All Might and Gran Torino have a very interesting definition of training. Izuku placed both hands on his desk and sighed. Honestly, if dragons were real, they probably would have made me fight one. Didn't you have a kohai that could turn into a dragon? Izuku's eyes went wide and he drummed his fingers on the desk. Did I? Junko just shrugged. I remember seeing her in the sports festival. Oh. Silence fell between them again, and this time Junko was the one to break it. So, if I thought this was a date and I said yes to it, and you were going to ask me out eventually, does that make this a date? Izuku bit his lip for a moment, a glorious moment that nearly had her swooning with the look on his face. I want to say yes. I want you to say yes. Then I guess this is a date. He extended his hand out across the table. She took it with both of hers and smiled. Wow, so, how long until things are awkward again? Probably when our food shows up. I like that. The food was almost as good as the company. You're skipping. I'm not. You're so totally skipping. Izuku laughed. Junko skipped in front of him and stared up at him, halting their after-dinner walk through a nearby park. The dinner date had expanded into a full-on date and they were just waiting for a movie to start before diving into that. So what if I am? She squeezed his hands softly again. It was so rough and filled with calluses, just like hers. You have no idea how much I needed all of this. I finally get to be a hero, then I have a blast going on patrol, and now I'm going on a date with a great guy. How can I not skip? Izuku gave a chuckle that had his shoulders bouncing. He squeezed her hand back and smiled. I guess I should start skipping too then. He started to skip as she joined him, and they reached the end of the path before they separated into a fit of laughter that ended with both of them sitting on the same bench. You know, she said, pushing some of her hair out of her face, I've been meaning to ask you something for a while. We just met. He made a face she barely caught in the cold night. The mist of their breaths tingled in the air. Honestly, we might be going a little fast with the date thing. Nah, we should be fine. Besides, dating is how we're supposed to get to know each other, right? Junko laughed and kicked her feet out. But really, I've known about perseverance for a long time. I kind of wanted to go to U8 to meet you, but the commission made an offer and I had to take it. So, I just want to know. He smiled down at her. He was so tall. Why perseverance? Well, for a long time I struggled with my quirk. He began to roll up his sleeves and she saw the faint scars she hadn't seen when she saw his tanned picture. Also, that casual flex. So, when I was struggling to come up with a hero name that didn't make me sound like an All Might fanboy, Gran Torino laughed and said I had the perseverance to put up with his training but somehow struggled coming up with a name. He shrugged and rolled down his sleeve. I was thinking about changing it, but then All Might liked it, and after he did that interview, the name kind of stuck. What would you have called yourself instead? Izuku just shrugged. I don't know, but given how the HPSC like to spell my name as Deku, I might have gone with that. Honestly, I'd respect that level of spite. By the end of their date, Junko's cheeks hurt from smiling so much, and Izuku had firmly planted himself in her mind. They had another patrol set, as well as a second date. She couldn't wait. What exactly was going steady? Was there a time frame, or was it just a frame of mind? They had dated for a couple of weeks before they became official, and now they had been boyfriend and girlfriend for just over a week now. Technically, they were coming up on the anniversary of their first date. Honestly, Junko had no idea if they should celebrate or if becoming official was what they should be celebrating. Or if they should celebrate it at all. Then there was her life as a hero. It had been a month since her debut, and she had never felt so alive. Sure, there was a minor hiccup with people assuming she was Izuku's new sidekick, given how most of her patrols had been partnered with him and how she was literally unheard of. She really shouldn't be surprised. But after a couple dozen patrols on her own and a press release on her part, most of those rumors had vanished. Sue, the interviewer, and Sakamoto wiggled in her seat as a smile spread across her pretty face, about those rumors between the lovely Lady Nagant and the golden boy Perseverance, and leaned forward, biting her lip and wiggling her eyebrows. Care to comment? But other rumors had grown in their stead. It was probably the stage makeup she was wearing, or the heat from the lights needed to make her not look like a ghost on stage, or even her social ineptitude that never really developed past middle school, but Junko found her cheeks burning at the implications. It was one thing to date Izuku, but something completely different to talk about it on live TV. Aren't we here to talk about me being a hero? Junko felt her voice crack, which only drew some awes from the live audience, and a giggle from the host. Of course. And clapped her hands and pushed her pretty blonde hair to the side. We already did that though, and now we want to know what your relationship is with Perseverance. Considering how you debuted patrolling alongside him, and how you go on patrols with him, and recently, this image has been making waves on the internet. Junko turned to see an image of herself and Izuku kissing in their hero costumes. It was just a small harmless smooch while they were taking a rest on a rooftop. Compared to everything else that had happened between them, it felt so minor. It wasn't even their first embrace. But she remembered that harmless smooch clearly. Junko sunk into her seat. She was pretty sure her stage makeup was melting off with how hot her face felt. No, or these? More images appeared. Another smooch in hero costumes, another of them holding hands in hero costumes, and then one in their civilian clothes. She remembered that moment so well. It was when they had become official, taken moments after their first embrace as boyfriend and girlfriend, their foreheads touching as they smiled and laughed in their own little world. The picture was breathtaking. In the face of such overwhelming evidence, she only had two real options: blush and pretend like she didn't know what they were talking about, or stand up and own it. Okay, she said mostly to herself, then she leaned forward to get a better look at that photo again. To the person that took that last photo, I'll forgive you if you send me a copy. She chose the latter option. So, is that a confirmation? And asked, you and Perseverance are a couple? Junko looked at the photos again and shrugged. She was sure that her and Izuku weren't hiding anything, especially since he was the one that gave her those public displays of affection while they were on duty, but there was only so much she was willing to admit without him here. She smiled, feeling confident in the situation, and looked right towards the camera closest to her. Its light changed to indicate that it was the one they were now shooting from. She crossed her arms and allowed her smugness to speak for itself. Confirm without confirming. I believe the evidence speaks for itself. It certainly does, and giggled and matched Junko's own smugness. But that doesn't mean we're not all curious. After all, I'm sure there's plenty of women out there lamenting that the future #1 hero is officially off the market. So, how did you two meet? I jumped through a window and he thought it was cool as hell. Who asked who out? Not telling. What's it like dating him? Junko shrugged. Alright, are we going to get a straight answer out of you? Nope. Well, I gotta ask anyways, and laughed. Of course, it's your job, though I'd prefer if you ask about my job and not my love life. Okay, fine, just one more question. And gave a slight pout before smiling again. What's he like outside of the costume? Junko tapped on her cheek and smiled towards the crowd. Well, I'll say he's a bit of a dork. She stuck her tongue out and winked. But that's all you'll get from me. Not even a hint of what he's like in the bedroom. Junko rolled her eyes. Moving on. Fine, fine. And waved her hand and sighed. Now then, it's only been a month since your debut, and already you're the talk of the town. Not only have you teamed up with the mighty Perseverance to take down numerous threats, but on your own solo adventures, you're up there with workaholics like Maruko. Care to comment on what drives you? Junko just shrugged. Well, the answer is really easy. It helps her forget. I've always dreamed of being a hero, ever since I was little, so once I was finally able to go out and be a hero, I fell in love with it instantly. It's just nice being able to do what I've dreamed of for so long. It certainly seems that way, and you're leaving quite a few impressions on people as you do it. Care to see some reactions? Junko looked back towards the screen again. That last photo of her and Izuku was still up there. Of my heroics? You bet. You're generally off and running once the police show up, but we still have a few interviews of the people you've saved. She's awesome. A girl in a middle school uniform with long blue hair bounced and pointed towards the villain she had defeated a couple weeks ago. Like, she just swings in from nowhere with her arm rifle thing going bang bang bang, and then the bad guys are like ah. And she then kicks them while shooting them with her hair and stuff, and it looks like it hurts a lot, and they even get stuck to the ground and stuff, and it's just so cool watching her. When I grow up, do you think she'll be my girlfriend? Was that last part necessary? Junko asked, looking at the hyperactive girl. Believe it or not, we're cutting her short? And laughed. That girl went on for a good 10 more minutes about how pretty your hair was and how great of a hero you are. On to the next one. Endeavor. Endeavor. The camera showed motion as the reporter rushed up to meet the current number 3 hero. The tall, red-haired man had a milkshake in his hand and was looking mildly annoyed. The girl riding on his shoulders looked bored, while the other 2 children looked amused. The white-haired woman with him looked equally annoyed. With a groan, Endeavor turned towards the camera. Can't I have a day with my kids without being interviewed? Sorry, just real quick, what are your thoughts on Nagant? Endeavor furrowed his brows. Gun arm lady. Yes, what do you think of her, and her relationship with Perseverance? I think she's a great hero. She clearly puts a lot of work into honing her skills with and without her quirk, something that more people should do. As for her relationship, it's none of my goddamn business, and not yours either. With that, Endeavor took a sip of his milkshake and continued on his way with his family. Honestly, I think he's my hero, Junko admitted. It really is none of your business. Actually it is. And replied cheerfully. Hero gossip like this is how I make a living. Well, at least you're honest about it. Speaking of honesty, let's see what Loverboy Perseverance has to say about you. Junko felt her ears burn as she saw Izuku in his hero costume appear on the TV. Nagant. He scratched the back of his head. Well, she's great. She's basically a certified badass that I trust with my life. So few words. And she wanted to embrace the heck out of him for them. Dinner at Izuku's. A movie at Izuku's. And matching underwear that was too uncomfortable to wear with her hero suit. Junko bit her lip as she stared at her phone, looking over the text she had sent Izuku over the past day to confirm what they were doing tonight and all the implications tied in there. She had been to Izuku's condo before, for a day of relaxation before they went home, but tonight was different. Tonight she was going to stay the night. As for what exactly that meant, she was more than willing to find out. See you at 5. Izuku's text read with a heart next to it. She let out a scream and flopped onto her bed, burying her head into the pillow and kicking her legs randomly. It was going to be romantic, it was going to be fun, it was going to be magical. A whole night with just her and Izuku, a good home-cooked meal, a bunch of movies they can laugh and cry at. And all the kissing she could take. It didn't take much to picture them sitting on his couch, a movie playing in the background, her legs crossed over his. His hand would touch his face while the other gripped her waist softly, their heads growing closer by the moment. She could feel those kisses already. An extra bit of intimacy compared to every single one she had in the past. Each and every one of those kisses would lead towards something more until they were just foolin' making out, laughing at the simple actions and trying to diminish their own nervousness. Suddenly, with the slightest bit of hesitation. They'd stop, her hand on his and his shirt rolled up by her arm. His own hand would touch her now bare stomach. Permission. Granted. She squealed again and smiled. Section. She wanted to have it. She wanted to have it with Izuku. She wanted to have it with Izuku tonight. But oddly more important than anything that happened tonight, she was most excited to find out what it would be like to wake up beside him. I'm not interrupting something, am I? Yuso's voice was like a heavy wet blanket that dragged down her mood and reminded her of her reality. It had nearly been 2 months since that last killing she was supposed to do. She sat up and glared at him. I have a date with Izuku? You'll have to postpone. He said firmly, a folder in his hands. We have a mission for you. Can't it wait? If you want more people to die. She wanted to scream, and not in the same way that she had been screaming earlier. Can't this be a hero thing? I can get Izuku and we can. This is a hero thing, or did you forget what you are? USO stepped forward. This affects Izuku too. What do you mean? Do you recall those slime monsters? USO's voice was firm. We found their source, so that's something that Izuku and I can do together. She stood and gripped her rifle arm. I just don't want to kill again. You're going to have to. Yuso motioned for her to follow, and she found every foot she took after him feeling heavier and heavier. The source was a child with a quirk that made those slime monsters. It was his father, a hero in the top 10, that was sending them out into the city, and he was one of the few heroes able to deal with them. Beyond that, there was a hint that he could be aiming to create a slime monster that could hurt or kill Izuku. Her night, which had seemed so bright, was now clouded by a dark sky filled with rain. Hey, she texted Izuku. I'm going to have to cancel tonight. Do you think we can reschedule? Did something come up? Yeah. Don't worry though, everything's fine. I just have to take care of something. Okay, well, how about tomorrow? Sure. That sounds great. And exactly what she'll need. The magic he had felt yesterday of getting his apartment ready for what was bound to be a wonderful night with his girlfriend had vanished with a text, and concern had filled the void. Was she okay? Well, he knew she was okay, her text said as much. But, did "I'm okay" really mean she was okay? It didn't feel like it. Izuku placed his hands on the counter and stared at all the food he had prepped for the meal they were going to cook together. A bottle of wine he wasn't sure was going to be opened sat next to his phone. It always amazed him that Junko was still 18. Sure, she could be a bit of a goofball, but she seemed more mature than him. She could probably handle a bit of wine if she wanted it. Then again, it was Ray that suggested it. His phone caught his eye. There was no new text waiting for him, but he found himself grabbing his phone. A text had led him to Junko. At first he thought it was just a coincidence. But the more he thought about it, the more suspicious it was. Anonymous tips were fairly common for heroes, especially established ones. They were often done through forums, mail, notes, or even phone calls. But this one stood out to Izuku. It was a text to his private line. She needs someone to save her. And then there was a ping towards the warehouse where he ran into Junko. Then he completely forgot about the text as he practically fell head over heels for her. Honestly, he was pretty sure he fell in love with her the moment she came flying into that room and taking out 7 goons in less than a second. He promptly forgot about the text after he saved those girls. He thought that's who he was supposed to save. But then what if it wasn't? He checked the text again. There was no sender ID, and any time he tried to send a message to it, all he got was an error message. That could mean many things. A hacker had sent him a message, there was some sort of a tech that could be used to send these kinds of messages, or it was quirk bullshit. But either way, they wanted him to be at that specific location at that specific time to save her. He was happy for the girls he and Junko had saved that night. But he was starting to think that those girls weren't who he was supposed to save. He tapped his phone and glanced at the time. The kind of person that could send a text like this could do more to destroy King Raid's operation than just sending a text to him. It had to be for Junko. Someone wanted him to save her. But save her from what? A knock came from his door. Junko. He pulled his girlfriend into a tight, full-bodied hug the moment he saw her. He hadn't really planned on it, but there was an odd mixture of relief at seeing her okay, and the look on her face saying she needed one hell of a hug. Jai. She made a cute noise as he squeezed her just a bit too tight. Her arm flailed for a moment before she hugged back, her arms going around his back. He felt her hand grab a bit of his shirt while she kept her head buried into his. For over a minute they stood in his doorway, slowly walking back and forth as he let her get all the hugging she'd need. She pressed her hand on his tee and smiled up at him. "Thanks, I always wanted to know what your shirt smelled like. Do you always smell shirts before you wear them?" Gay. She probably wasn't even aware of the cute noises she made whenever he surprised her. But this time the bright red on her cheeks almost made him feel guilty. But mostly it just made him want to embrace her. Again and again and again. She turned with a slight huff, her hand still on his. I am. She did that thing where she tucked a bit of her hair back behind her ear only for it to fall back into place the moment she turned her head. With the shake of her head she glanced up at him and took a deep breath, her embarrassment turning to resolve. "I wouldn't have anything to go with it though." She tapped her chin with a huff. "I guess I could wear just your shirt." Now it was his turn to blush as they entered his home. Once the door clicked behind him it felt like they were in their own separate world. So, he placed his hands on her shoulders as softly as he could and kissed her head right above her ear. He could still smell her shampoo. "Why'd you want to leave your phone behind?" She stiffened slightly and then turned back to him. "Well, I didn't want anything to distract me from you. That was never a problem before." "Thanks then." He kissed her on the top of her head and watched as she squirmed under it. "Now come on, let's cook this dinner." "Sure," she beamed at him. The cracks were starting to form in the happy mask Junko had been putting up all night. It was never there when she looked at him, but through the corner of his eyes he could see her face change. It was never the same emotion. Sometimes it looked like she was sad, other times it looked like she was furious, but no matter what it was not happy. She was trying so strong to stay happy despite it though. "Junko," he pressed his head into her hair and kissed her on the top of her head again. He wanted to save her. "You can trust me," he said softly. Her entire body stiffened in his arms. Their couch-cuddling position had her all but laying on him so they could maximize the amount of contact between them. "I know something is bothering you. So please," he squeezed her. "Let me help you." Her breath turned to a sob. Her entire body shaking as she grabbed his shirt and a bit of moisture began to seep through. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wanted this night to be happy with you." She let out a shudder and gasped for air. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Junko," he said softly. He didn't know what to do. He had helped many people with their emotional problems before, people panicking, experiencing loss. It was all part of being a hero. But now, he had no idea how to help her. He just knew that she needed to be saved. So he did the only thing he could do. Shower her with affection. He kissed her head again and again and again as though to punctuate every single sentence of his life. "You have nothing to apologize for. Part of being in a relationship is helping each other. So please, let me help you." "I can't." She squirmed. "I can't tell you. If I tell you, then you'd hate me." "How could I ever hate you?" She buried her face in his tsitsi. Her entire body was dedicated towards letting out choking sobs that had him so worried for her. What happened? What did the HPSC make her do? It had to be them. They had control over her life. They were the only ones that could force her to do anything. Was it the HPSC? He asked when she didn't answer. Her body seized and she looked up at him. Her eyes were choked red with tears that still fell from her eyes like they were intent on leaving scars along her cheeks. "How? How did I know?" She nodded, her jaw slack with disbelief. He sat them both up, still holding her just enough to comfort her. "It wasn't strong. You live at their headquarters. They trained you. They support your siblings. They have so much control over your life. They're the only option. So what did they make you do?" She rubbed her right arm and sniffed back some tears. She took in a slow, steady breath. "I can't keep doing this. I know it's wrong, but every time I question him it makes sense, and I go along with it. It started so innocent, I was just doing recon. They told me to pull the trigger." He sat there watching her push her tears back as her frown twitched and hiccups, sobs and laughter mixed into a wailing that broke his heart. "The recon stopped. I got put on more and more missions like that. They made sense. Terrorists. Radicals. Villain leaders. Gangsters. Terrible people. I was saving lives. But then it turned to heroes. Heroes that were working with villains. She hung her head low and let out a sob that turned into a laugh. Then the boy that made those slime monsters. USO found him. His dad was a pro. He wanted to use his son to improve his rankings. He was unleashing those monsters. He wanted to make one with acid. He fed his son acid. He was a monster. Her breathing became ragged and she grabbed her own shoulders. Izuku pulled her into a hug, but she didn't return it. She just rag-dolled in his arms, her head lulling against his shoulder. Last night, she said softly. Last night I turned a boy into an orphan. Up until now he never understood why villains would just go on a rampage and destroy buildings. But then again, he never felt this much rage before in his life. Then, Junko laughed, a smile that held no joy spread across her face. They said to pull the trigger again. I knew I shouldn't. I knew I didn't want to. But it made so much sense. He was a danger. His quirk was making acid now. She let out a cry that broke his heart. I killed a kid. She sobbed and looked at him with fear in her eyes. I don't want to kill people. I know, Junko. He hugged her softly while patting the back of her head. I know. I'm a murderer. He opened his mouth to speak but hesitated. She just admitted to killing people. How many he didn't know. He needed to be careful. Junko, I know you're a hero. Heroes don't kill people. Her shoulders slump. I can't be both. I don't want to be both. Junko, he wiped the tear from her eye and gave her a soothing embrace on her forehead. I want you to stay here from now on. Her eyes widened. Why? So I can protect you. But the HPSE. My missions. They're important. If I don't, then they'll talk about you. The other heroes. I'm supposed to keep the barrier up. What was she talking about? It was almost like she wasn't herself. Izuku took in a deep breath. He wanted to go to the HPSC right now and see if he could rip it from the foundations. It took several hours before Junko fell asleep, and he left her in his bed, hoping that no nightmares would plague her dreams. When he picked up his phone, he found that the same text from before was still on the screen. He was there to save Junko after all. He went into his contacts and called the person he trusted most. All Might, he said firmly. We need to talk. Okay, but why am I here? Enji Todoroki asked, a cup of coffee being casually heated in his hand. Out of the three of them, he was the one that looked the least pissed off by all this. Voice of reason, All Might replied with a smirk and a wink. Enji took a sip from his coffee and groaned. I thought since you got me out of bed on a Sunday I'd at least get to be the muscle for once, but why do I have to be the moral compass? Izuku shrugged. You're married to Rei. Oh well, if that's the case I'll call her up. Enji let out a puff of fire as he sighed, then turned his gaze towards the vague direction of the HPSC building. You do understand what you're asking, right? With the top 3 heroes? Izuku hummed and tapped his fingers along the chair. The ounce of sleep he had gotten last night had done nothing for his mood. It wasn't until All Might and Enji showed up that he actually felt slightly normal. Junko was still asleep in his room. Probably. She could easily be awake and be listening in on their conversation. I'm pretty sure we could just go over their heads. Or see if we can throw their entire building. Buildings aren't good projectiles, All Might muttered. They're only really designed to have the one. Toshi, Enji warned. Right, that was a joke. Izuku held up his pinched fingers and smiled. Only a little bit. Right, look, since for some reason I'm the voice of reason, Enji started, his hand pressed firmly onto the round table. Are we seriously talking about taking down a government organization because your girlfriend had a meltdown? Izuku nodded. Yeah. I know it seems like a bit much, but I really think that they were brainwashing her or something. That's a thing, right? All Might shrugged. I heard rumors that other countries did it during times of war, but nothing recent, though we can't really rule out it being a quirk or something. Enji's stern face turned into a tight frown as he closed his eyes. A few years ago, I met with the current president. Our conversation was strange. He kept talking about how great it would be if my children could become a hero like me, and how if I couldn't beat All Might, then my kid could beat him. The idea stuck for a while, far longer than it should have, to the point I had a mental breakdown when Fuyumi's quirk wasn't fit for heroics. Enji let out a sigh and then glanced towards Izuku, holding his eyes firmly. Rei was able to be there for me and work it out. I just thought it was stress, but with this, I can't help but think that Yuso was somehow able to put that idea in my head. So, All Might leaned back, tapping on his chin. Honestly, the conversation I had with him a few years ago is why I decided to postpone my retirement. Alright, so, either he's got a silver tongue like Nizu, he's using a quirk, or we're all easily manipulated. Honestly, two of those could be the same thing. All Might sat forward and rested his massive arms on the table. But Izuku spun on his heels to see Junko standing in the hallway. She looked breathtaking in the morning, in part because she was dressed in one of his button-up shirts that completely engulfed her. The way the sleeves dangled from her hands was especially appealing. Then there were the loose sweatpants she was wearing that were just barely tight enough to stay on her hips. It would have been perfect, save for the redness of her eyes and the tear stains on her cheeks. She scratched the back of her head and looked at him, then All Might and Enji. Am I interrupting something? Nope. All Might clapped. We were just discussing how to bring down the HPSC. You're just in time to join the War Council. Have a seat. Enji gestured towards Izuku's seat. You're deeper into this than any of us. Izuku watched Junko's eyes grow wide before she nodded and nearly stumbled into the seat. Are you okay? Izuku asked her softly, moving to grab his hand and squeezed softly. Better. She smiled and kissed him on the cheek. At least, I think. Sorry about. It's all right, I'm honestly glad you told me. Izuku kissed the top of her head and she let out a soft sigh. Honestly, I think the first step is to get you two out of here. Enji crossed his arms and sat back in his chair. Rei's great at planning vacations, and we can probably make it so that they won't even know you left until you're sitting on a beach wondering where your martini is. What? Izuku furrowed his brow and glanced at Enji. But shouldn't I be there to help? I mean, this is technically my idea. I agree with Enji. All Might shrugged. Especially after what he said about talking to Yuso is true. What about Yuso? Junko asked, her voice cracking through sleepiness. Oh, right, well basically we think he might be using a quirk on. All Might said in a calming voice. But, Junko squeezed her eyes shut tight. Yuso's quirkless. He told me as much when I asked him. She shook her head and then slapped her cheek strong enough to leave a red mark that faded in a couple of seconds. Why can't I even consider that? Izuku looked towards All Might and Enji, who nodded in agreement. Maybe they were right, and he needed to give Junko time to recover. He had been daydreaming about taking her on vacation, mostly someplace warmer with a nice beach so he could see her in a swimsuit. It'd be his first vacation as a hero. Probably hers as well. I think that all but confirms it, then. All Might tapped on his chin. If Yuso's quirk can manipulate people like that, then he'd probably be able to make people think he's quirkless. Oddly terrifying. Surprised he didn't get into politics with a quirk like that. Enji mumbled. We'll probably have to ask around, get the rat involved. Do we have to? All Might sighed and pinched his nose. If we get Nizu involved, then we'll have a 12-step plan that'll work but also be a pain in the butt? Enji shrugged. Can you think of any ideas that don't involve throwing the building? No, but I still think that's a great idea. Junko let out a cute giggle at that exchange and then her eyes went wide. Holy SHT. You're all might and endeavor. And you're the lovely Lady Nagant? Enji gave her a small nod. My daughter loves you. Finally wake up, huh? All Might beamed. Izuku smiled and watched Junko's face for a few moments before she turned away with a shy huff. He chuckled and looked back towards All Might and Enji. Are you too sure about this? Yeah, both of us probably have enough clout to at the very least get Yuso removed from his position. Enji gave a light shrug. Add in Nizu and we can probably get the whole HPSC restructured in a month or two, but in the meantime, All Might snapped a finger at Nagant. You need to stay away from there. I'd love to, but I mean my family. Junko sank down into her seat. They take care of my little sister May. I'll take her in, problem solved. Injire clapped like it was a done deal. She's had to swap schools because she exploded their science lab. And I have scorch marks on my toilet. Enji shrugged, his smile growing as Junko made a face of disbelief. Me and my wife have raised 2 kids with fire quirks. My house is basically fireproof. Besides, it's not like your sister is a bad kid, right? No, she's just really smart and likes to make gadgets and stuff. Junko half muttered. Are you really okay with taking her in? Sure. I can talk my wife into it. Easy. Enji smiled and tapped onto the table. If she's as smart as you say, it might WHP a few of my kids into shape. Izuku nudged Junko softly. What about your brother? Junko's brow furrowed and she patted her leg for her phone before looking over towards his bed for a moment. As far as I know, he's in Germany interning somewhere. So I guess that means he's safe. Gee, she rubbed her head again and let her shoulders slump. This feels weird. That's why you need to go. All Might leaned onto the table and looked Junko right in the eyes. You need to clear your head. Quirks that mess with your thoughts are nasty, and if it's been happening to you for as long as you've been there, then you need more than a day off to clear your head. But, Junko whispered, I want to be a hero. And you are, All Might continued. Believe me, the green bean over there doesn't stop gushing about how much of a badass you are. Once you get back, you'll be kicking butt like before and then some. Junko stared at All Might's hand for a few moments before she nodded. A knock came from Izuku's door, and the table grew silent. Izuku could do little more than shrug at the inquisitive eyebrows raised at him. I'll go see who it is. He stood from the table and made his way to his door. His head was already spinning from what exactly was going on. He was sure that All Might and Enji were taking this upon themselves to protect him, though it could also be a bit of bitterness on their parts, as both had complained about the HPSC from time to time before. Still, he couldn't help but feel like they were underestimating just how much reach the HPSC had. Hell, Izuku found the words stuck in his throat as he saw who was standing in front of his door. A bald man with a red beard, a pair of sunglasses on even though they were indoors, and a well-fitted suit. The shining pin of the HPSC sat firmly pressed into his collar. Who are you? The man adjusted his tie and nodded. I'm Jinpei, I work with the HPSC. I'm here to retrieve Junko Hatsume. Izuku blinked. Retrieved. She wasn't property. She's not here. Jinpei leaned slightly to the side, getting a clear look at the inside of Izuku's apartment, specifically towards the table where Junko was sitting with All Might and Enji. For a moment, Izuku could have sworn he saw Jinpei's firm mouth smile for a moment before he straightened himself and nodded. I see. I'll be sure to relay that information. If you see her, give her my regards. Before Izuku could shut the door, Jinpei started to walk down the hall. There was no fuss. No threats. What was with that? When he shut the door, Izuku felt his phone vibrate with a new text notification. It was from that number again. The one that had led him to Junko. Don't give him the chance to speak. His quirk is too powerful.